Why did no one look at her when the orders were handed out? The room was heavy with voices. Boots scuffed against the tiled floor, chairs scraped backward, and the flicker of an overhead projector painted restless light across faces that weren't hers. Men leaned forward, elbows pressing into tables cluttered with maps and notes. Their words overlapped, each one eager to be heard, louder than the last. But in the third row, near the corner, she sat untouched by attention. No one asked her to move closer. No one paused to hear what she might see in the satellite image glowing faintly on the screen. No one even noticed the way her eyes narrowed when she spotted something small, an unusual heat mark near the ridgeline. It was barely there, a faint discoloration, but her mind locked on it. Still, she didn't speak. Because her silence had been mistaken before, mistaken for hesitation, mistaken for fragility, mistaken for irrelevance. She had learned the hard way that in rooms like this, silence wasn't neutral, it was branded as weakness. But she also knew something they didn't. Silence in her hands was never weakness, it was weight, a shield, a weapon sharper than words. The commander's voice cut across the room. We move before sunrise. The convoy intercept is priority 1. Intel says weapons are moving across the valley. If they make it through, it won't be our men paying the price. It'll be villages 3 ridges over. Failure isn't an option. A low murmur of agreement swept through the room. Men scribbled notes. Someone chuckled darkly, muttering about the terrain. Another soldier rubbed the back of his neck, his jaw clenched too tight to hide his nerves. She saw it all. The young private 2 seats ahead tapping his boot against the floor, faster and faster as the briefing dragged on. The sergeant pretending not to look at the weather board, knowing full well the storm front was closing faster than command admitted. The lieutenant adjusting his pen in restless patterns, a tic he only had when he doubted the plan. And she noticed the things no one else did. But she didn't raise her hand, because the room wasn't listening for her voice. Outside, the rain had begun, a steady tap against the windows, streaking the yellow light inside into long, blurred smears. The air smelled faintly of ozone and damp concrete. As the briefing ended, men rose, papers folded, weapons slung casually over shoulders. Their laughter was tight, too sharp around the edges, as though daring fear to break through. She lingered slower than the rest, rolling the details over in her head. The valley, the crosswinds, the hidden angles. She could already picture the narrow switchbacks, the sound of tires on wet rock, the way echoes twisted in the mountain air. She could already imagine what might wait there. Her hand brushed the folder against her chest, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Because her silence wasn't for them, it was for herself. Her father's voice came back to her, years ago, long before uniforms, long before call signs, long before war. A wooden porch back home, the smell of tobacco and sawdust, the crickets singing at dusk. Sometimes the strongest voice, he had said, looking out into the fields, is the one that waits until the room is quiet enough to hear it. But this room never quieted. So she carried her voice elsewhere. The convoy rolled out under a bruised sky. Humvees growled across wet gravel, headlights slicing through the mist. She sat in the second vehicle, her rifle across her knees, window cracked just enough to let the damp wind slip in and cool her face. The world outside blurred into rain-slick rock and shadows that seemed to lean closer as they drove deeper. Around her, the men shifted restlessly. One soldier muttered a joke about how mountain passes were God's shooting galleries. Another forced a laugh, too loud, too brittle. Someone else checked his weapon again and again, as though the motion itself could keep the unease at bay. She said nothing. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, always the horizon. The mountains loomed higher now, jagged silhouettes against a storm-fed sky. The pass narrowed with each mile, cliffs rising on both sides like stone jaws waiting to close. It was then she saw it. A glint. Tiny, quick, barely a shimmer above the ridge. Not lightning, not rain, not stone. A reflection. Her chest tightened. She leaned forward, lips parting, ready to speak, ready to warn. But something stopped her. The memory of last time. The way her words had been dismissed. The way men had smirked, muttered under their breath about nerves, about how she wasn't cut for the work. She had sworn she wouldn't give them the chance again. So she swallowed the words and let silence press its weight against her tongue. The convoy pressed deeper. Engines roared against the stone walls. Radios crackled, cutting in and out with the interference of storm clouds overhead. The valley felt tight, suffocating, every sound amplified, every silence louder. Then it happened. The first explosion split the night apart. A fireball swallowed the lead vehicle, a blast of heat and metal tearing into the rain-soaked air. Shards of steel clattered against rock. Smoke and flame twisted into the sky. The shockwave slammed into her chest, rattling her bones. The Humvee lurched violently, brakes squealing as men screamed. Ambush, ambush, voices roared, doors flung open, boots hit mud, rifles snapped up toward the ridges. Gunfire rained down. A storm of bullets ricocheted against stone, sparks exploding in showers. The valley lit with muzzle flashes from above, shadows strobing across jagged cliffs. Men fired upward blindly. The echoes twisted, bouncing off stone, making every shot seem to come from everywhere at once. She stayed low, pressed into the seat, heart pounding, but her eyes never left the ridges. Because silence again looked like fear. But her silence was measuring. Through the chaos, through the roar of fire and thunder, she listened, not just to sound, but to absence. Between bursts of gunfire, she caught it, the rhythm. Shooters paused, reloaded, shouted signals she couldn't hear but could feel. 3 clusters, no more. One high on the left ridge, one across the right, one near the center rock outcrop. Her fingers moved, slowly, carefully. The rifle came up across her knees. Her cheek pressed against the stock, scope rising to her eye. One breath in, one breath out. The rain streaked across her lens, but she blinked it away, adjusting, focusing. There, a figure leaning too far from cover, another fumbling with a magazine, another stepping into the open for just a second too long. Her silence, sharp as glass, became precision. The first shot cracked like lightning. The second. The third. Each one clean, each one final. The echoes shifted, the storm of fire lessened. The men around her shouted, voices laced with shock, because suddenly they could move. Suddenly cover was possible. Suddenly survival didn't feel like a lie. One soldier turned, his face streaked with mud and fear, his eyes finding hers. It was the first time anyone had really looked at her. But she didn't look back. Because this wasn't about recognition. It was about survival. The firefight tapered. The ridges fell silent. Smoke curled upward, swallowed by rain. The team regrouped, panting, bleeding, shaking. The commander barked orders. Medics sprinted toward the wreck of the lead Humvee, dragging men out of fire and steel. She sat still, rifle across her knees, breath slow, eyes distant. No one thanked her, no one spoke to her. But they knew. And she knew they knew. Which was enough for now. Yet as she stared back up at the ridge, where her silence had shifted the balance of life and death, a thought cut through her chest like shrapnel. Why had she seen the glint first? Why had no one else? And why, when she had she stayed quiet? The question followed her long after the smoke cleared, long after the convoy moved again, long into the night when the rain softened into mist and the mountains loomed like silent judges above them. It followed her because she knew the answer. And she wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. Why did the silence afterward feel heavier than the gunfire itself? The convoy crawled forward, limping through the valley with one less vehicle and more wounds than they'd prepared for. The night air smelled of scorched rubber, blood, and damp earth. Every bump in the road jolted groans from the injured men, their voices tight with pain they refused to admit aloud. She sat pressed against the window, rifle balanced across her lap, her gaze fixed on the mountains outside. The ridges loomed dark, their jagged edges cutting the sky into harsh shapes. The storm had thinned to drizzle, but every drop against the glass sounded like a reminder of the glint she had seen. The glint she had swallowed. If she had spoken sooner, would the lead vehicle still be intact? Would Corporal Jennings still be alive, instead of zipped into a bag they'd left with the medevac minutes earlier? The thought stuck like a thorn under her ribs. She shifted slightly, her breath fogging the window, but she said nothing. Around her, men spoke in hushed tones. Some cursed under their breath. Others replayed the ambush in fragmented sentences, trying to stitch sense into something senseless. "You see, that blast came out of nowhere. Could have sworn the intel said no activity here. They're ghosts, I swear, always one step ahead." No one mentioned her shots, not directly, but she felt their eyes flicker toward her, quick glances stolen when they thought she wasn't looking. As though they couldn't decide what unnerved them more, the ambush, or the fact that she had cut it short. She leaned back, letting the vibrations of the engine hum through her spine, her mind spiraling elsewhere. To a time before this uniform, before this valley, before her silence had become the only shield she trusted. Her father's hand on her shoulder, the smell of pine and gun oil, the crack of a rifle on an open range. "You don't shoot for the noise," he had said. "You shoot for the silence that follows." Back then she hadn't understood. She was barely 16, standing in boots too big for her feet, squinting through a scope that seemed heavier than her own arms. She had wanted to prove herself with the shot itself, the sound of it, the moment of action. But he had shaken his head, patient. "No, the silence after, that's where the truth lives. That's where lives are measured." And now, in this rattling Humvee, she understood all too well. The silence afterward was crushing. The convoy stopped at a checkpoint carved from stone and sandbags, half buried in the mountain's shadow. A flickering lantern marked the post, its glow painting tired faces with gold. The team disembarked, dragging the wounded to shelter, their boots slapping against wet rock. She climbed out last. The night air hit her sharp and cold. She pulled her hood tighter, rifle slung across her back. Around her, the others moved with rigid purpose, patching wounds, radioing updates, setting up perimeter guards. But the air between them was heavy, heavier than usual. She walked toward the edge of the checkpoint where the mountain dropped into darkness. The valley below was hidden under fog, but she could feel it staring back at her, wide, silent, watching. Boots crunched behind her. "You saw it, didn't you?" She turned. It was Sergeant Hale, broad-shouldered, older than most, lines etched deep into his face. His voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that came from years of speaking less and seeing more. "You had eyes on that ridge before it lit up." Her throat tightened. For a moment she thought about denying it, about shrugging it off, but his gaze held hers unflinching. "I did." He nodded slowly, as though confirming something he'd already known. "Why didn't you say anything?" The question wasn't sharp, it wasn't accusing, but it landed heavy all the same. She looked back toward the fog. The drizzle had thickened again, beating on her eyelashes, streaking her vision. "Because last time I did, they didn't listen." Silence stretched between them. Only the wind filled it, howling low through the mountain pass. Hale's jaw worked. Then he said almost quietly, "They should have." Something in her chest loosened, and then tightened again, because even his acknowledgement couldn't erase what had already happened. Behind them, a medic's voice rose in frustration. "We're losing him. Pressure now." Both of them turned. A soldier lay on a stretcher, pale and slick with blood, his breaths ragged. The medic pressed down hard on the wound, another fumbling for supplies with shaking hands. The dying man's eyes fluttered. He reached out blindly, grasping at nothing. She moved before she thought. Kneeling, she caught his hand in hers, guiding it against her chest. His skin was cold, his grip weak. "You're here," she whispered. "Stay here." His gaze flickered toward her, unfocused, but for a heartbeat, just one, he seemed anchored. Then he was gone. The medic slumped back, swearing under his breath. Another zipped bag, another name for the list. She rose slowly, the soldier's chill lingering in her palm. Around her, men looked away, their faces tight with grief hidden under grit. She wanted to scream, to tear the night apart with the truth that had clawed at her since the glint on the ridge. But all that came was silence. Later, when the team gathered under the canvas shelter to choke down cold rations, the atmosphere was fractured. Conversations broke off mid-sentence. Laughter died before it started. The storm outside rattled the tarp like a restless hand. She sat apart listening. One soldier, barely older than 20, whispered about home, about how his brother had sent him a recording of his niece's first words. His voice cracked when he said he hadn't listened to it yet. Another confessed he couldn't stop replaying the explosion in his head, hearing it every time he closed his eyes. They weren't supposed to admit these things, but grief had a way of loosening tongues. And still, no one asked her to speak. She chewed in silence, the taste of rations like cardboard against her teeth. Every word unspoken weighed heavier in her chest. When the storm finally eased, the commander stepped into the shelter. His uniform was streaked with mud, his face carved with exhaustion. "We move again at first light," he said. "Mission stands, tonight changes nothing." But his eyes betrayed the words. She saw it, the shadow of doubt, the flicker of guilt, the unspoken knowledge that they had underestimated the valley, that men had died for it. She lay awake long after the others drifted into uneasy sleep. The night pressed close, filled with distant thunder and the drip of water against stone. She stared at the ceiling, her mind spiraling. The glint, the silence, the shots, the hand that had slipped out of hers. She replayed it again and again, until dawn bruised the horizon. And in that pale light, as the convoy prepared to move once more, she realized something she hadn't admitted even to herself. Her silence had saved them, but it had also cost them. And the question that gnawed at her was no longer why no one listened. It was whether she could forgive herself for not speaking, even when she knew she should have. She pulled her hood low, rifle secure, boots sinking into the mud as she followed the others. And for the first time she wondered if her silence, her shield, her refuge, might one day destroy her. Why did the mountains feel closer with every mile they climbed? The convoy crawled forward at dawn, engines groaning as tires ground against mud and gravel. The storm had thinned, leaving behind a low-hanging mist that hugged the slopes like a shroud. Sunlight broke in fractured pieces through the clouds, but it brought no warmth. The valley seemed indifferent to light, its shadows deeper, its silence heavier. She sat in the second Humvee, rifle upright between her knees, eyes scanning ridges scarred by last night's violence. Blackened craters marked where the ambush had started, smoke still curling faintly from shattered stone. The air smelled of charred rubber and iron. The men avoided looking too long at the blast site. Some clenched their jaws. Others forced themselves to watch, as though refusing to turn away might honor the dead. Her gaze lingered, not on the wreckage but on the ridge above, the place of the glint. She had measured her silence with lives. And lives had been lost. The thought pressed against her ribs until her breath came shallow. "Eyes forward, Carter." She turned slightly. Sergeant Hale's voice, steady as always, carried from across the seat. He wasn't scolding. He wasn't dismissing. It was more of a reminder. She gave a small nod, returning her eyes to the horizon. But even as she did, her thoughts refused to stay quiet. Back home, her silence had been different, safer. She remembered evenings on that wooden porch, where her father would sit in his worn chair and let silence stretch between them. No urgency, no judgment, just the kind of quiet that allowed thought to breathe. Her father's voice, calm and certain. You don't need to shout to be heard. Some people never understand that, but you will. She had, until she hadn't. The convoy slowed as the road tightened into a steep climb. The cliff face pressed close on one side, the drop yawning on the other. The Humvee jolted over ruts, throwing soldiers against their restraints. The radio crackled, voices struggling against static. Movement possible, ridge east, signal weak. The commander in the lead vehicle raised a fist out the window. Engines cut. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the ping of cooling metal and the distant cry of a hawk overhead. Every man shifted, hands tightening on weapons, eyes scanning the mist. She breathed in slowly. The air was damp, metallic. Her finger traced the worn ridges of her rifle's grip. Then faintly there. A sound. Not gunfire, not rockfall, softer, like fabric brushing stone, like someone moving carefully where they shouldn't be. Her heart ticked faster. She raised her rifle, scope sliding up toward the ridge. And she saw them. Not militia, not soldiers. Children. Two of them, maybe 10 years old, crouched near the rocks, watching the convoy with wide eyes. Their clothes were threadbare, their faces smudged with dirt, but their movements were sharp, intentional. One held a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her breath caught. It could be food. It could be something else. The commander barked through the radio. Positions, possible contact. Weapons rose, safeties clicked. Men tensed, fingers curling around triggers. She stayed frozen, scope locked on the children. The boy's hands trembled as he adjusted the bundle. His sister, smaller, thinner, clutched his sleeve. Not fighters, not threats, just children. Orders, a soldier demanded. The commander's voice came hard. If it moves against us, take it down. Her chest burned. She lowered the rifle slightly, torn in two directions. Her silence had already cost lives once, but if she spoke now, would they listen? Or would her voice only fuel the fire? Her hands shook. She tried to steady them. And then Sergeant Hale's voice cut in, calm but firm. Hold your fire, they're kids. The words hit the air like a stone breaking still water. For a moment, everything froze. The commander's voice snapped back. Stay sharp, we can't assume anything. But no shots came. The children stared for a few seconds longer, then darted back into the mist, their shapes swallowed by the mountain. The bundle tumbled loose in their escape, rolling down the slope. It struck rock, cloth unraveling. A loaf of bread. The men exhaled, relief and unease tangled together. Jesus, one muttered. Could have been a setup, another countered, but his voice lacked conviction. She lowered her rifle fully, shoulders tight, breath shuddering. Hale glanced at her, meeting her eyes. He didn't speak, but she saw it there, the acknowledgement. He had said what she hadn't. And the silence she had clung to suddenly felt heavier than ever. The convoy moved again. Hours stretched into a blur of gray rock and winding roads. The sun tried to break through, only to be swallowed by clouds again. Soldiers shifted in their seats, exhaustion pressing down like another layer of armor. Beside her, Private Miller tapped his knee restlessly, his lips moving in words he didn't say aloud. You praying? She asked softly, surprising even herself. His eyes flicked toward her, startled, then down again. Yeah, he muttered, guess so. For what? He hesitated, then voice low, for my kid, she's 3, I promised her I'd be home for her birthday. He let out a bitter laugh. That's in 6 days, don't think the mountain cares much about birthdays. She watched him, his hands trembling slightly against his rifle. She wanted to tell him she understood. that she had her own promises buried back home, one she feared she'd never keep. But the words stayed stuck, her silence pressing down again. So instead she said only, "She'll remember you tried." His eyes softened just for a second. Then the road jolted again and the moment broke. The day dragged on. Fatigue wrapped itself around the team, turning every sound into suspicion, every shadow into a threat. By the time night fell, they reached a plateau, flat ground with enough cover to set a temporary camp. The vehicles formed a circle, headlights off, radios muted to low static. Lanterns glowed faintly inside the canvas tents. She lay awake on her cot, the fabric creaking under her weight, rifle close at hand. Around her, men muttered in sleep, dreams twisting their breaths into restless patterns. Her eyes stared upward at the tent ceiling. The glint, the silence, the children, the bread rolling down the slope. Images bled together in her mind, each one a verdict on her choices, or lack of them. Her father's voice rose again in memory, steady, unyielding. The silence after the shot is what matters. But what about the silence before? She turned on her side, pulling the blanket tighter, but the question followed her into restless half-sleep. Somewhere in the night, gunfire cracked in the distance. Dull, scattered, not close, but enough to jolt men awake, hands gripping weapons. The camp held still, listening. The echoes faded. Silence pressed in again. And she lay there, eyes open, heart racing, wondering not if danger would return. But when? The mountain didn't sleep. Even when the soldiers tried, even when the lanterns dimmed and the camp lay still, the peaks loomed above like sentinels, watching, waiting. The silence wasn't peace. It was the pause before something moved. By dawn, the mist had thickened again, swallowing the horizon. The men broke down camp in hushed movements, shoulders hunched as though even sound might draw fire. Canvas folded, weapons checked, rations swallowed dry. No one lingered. She rose with them, boots crunching against frostbitten soil, rifle slung tight across her chest. Her eyes scanned the ridges as though they were alive. Because they were. Somewhere in the stone, the enemy breathed. The convoy rolled again, engines low, tires gnawing at broken road. The air was damp enough to cling to skin, turning each breath into mist. Her reflection stared back faintly in the glass beside her, eyes ringed with exhaustion, jaw set harder than she remembered. She turned away before it could say too much. Hours passed, measured not in time but in the rhythm of vigilance. Stop, start, halt, move, every stretch of road another chance for violence to uncoil. By midday they reached a narrow gorge. The rock walls closed in, towering high enough to block the weak sunlight. Their shadows stretched long, dark veins cutting through the convoy. The commander's voice crackled through radios. Single file, keep spacing, no margin for error. The vehicles slowed, one after another, the walls so close that even sound seemed trapped. Every man knew what it meant, no room to maneuver, no room to escape. A kill box. She felt her heartbeat rise in her throat. Her scope swept the cliffs. She searched every jagged ledge, every pocket of shadow. The silence stretched too far, too thin, as though the mountain itself was holding its breath. Then movement. There, high on the ridge, barely visible through the haze, a figure crouched low, adjusting something metallic, not a rifle, larger, mounted. Her breath caught. A heavy weapon, a machine gun nest. Contact. The word left her lips before she realized it. Sharp, loud, not whispered. Every head snapped toward her. The commander's voice snapped back. Where? She pointed, scope fixed. Ridge, 10 o'clock, nest setting up. The convoy jolted into motion. Men scrambled, rifles raised, barrels swinging skyward. The lead gunner unleashed a burst toward the ridge, sparks erupting off stone. Chaos split the silence. Shouts fire, echoes cracking against the gorge walls. The enemy answered. Tracers rained down, tearing into rock and dirt. Bullets clawed at metal, sparks flashing against the vehicle's armor. The mountain roared with violence. She pressed tight against the doorframe, sight locked on the nest. Her fingers squeezed one shot, two, three, until the gunner above crumpled backward, weapon sliding from his grip. But there were more. Shadows moving along the ridge, muzzle flashes sparking. Her rifle bucked, each shot an anchor against the chaos, each breath measured. One target fell, then another, but the fire didn't stop. The Humvee jolted as rounds chewed into its frame. Men shouted, one clutching his shoulder as blood seeped through his sleeve. "Medic!" The word tore through the air. She swung her rifle, scanning for the source. A soldier, Private Miller, was dragging the wounded man behind the vehicle, his hands shaking, his face pale. Her chest clenched. Miller, the one who prayed, the one with a daughter. She kept her rifle trained on the ridge, shielding his desperate scramble with bursts of covering fire. The weight of silence, her old companion, was gone. In its place, her voice ripped through the chaos. "Left ledge, take it down. Shift fire 3 o'clock. Move now." The men responded, not with doubt, not with hesitation, with trust. Rounds chewed into the ridge until the echoes dulled, until the last muzzle flash faded, until silence returned, not the brittle silence of fear, but the heavy quiet of aftermath. The gorge stank of cordite and burned stone. Smoke curled upward, clinging to jagged walls. The commander's voice came low, ragged through the radio. "Report. Casualties, wounds, but no more dead." The medic knelt by the injured soldier, hands red, bandages pressed tight. Miller sat nearby, chest heaving, eyes wide. He glanced at her once, just once, and in his gaze she saw something that felt heavier than words. Gratitude. And something else. Belief. Her rifle lowered slowly, barrel still warm. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She had spoken, she had broken the silence, and lives had been spared. But the weight in her chest didn't lift. Because the mountain wasn't finished. The commander's vehicle crawled forward, the radio buzzing again. "Keep moving. We're not staying in this gorge. If they set one nest, they'll set more." The convoy lurched on, engines straining as if the machines themselves feared the place. Every man scanned the ridges with haunted eyes. She sat back, rifle resting, heart still raw from the firefight. Her silence had cracked open, voice spilling into the chaos. And yet the question gnawed, had it been enough? Or was it already too late to undo what her earlier silence had cost? Night fell before they cleared the gorge. The camp they built was different this time. Not a circle of quiet caution, but a ring bristling with defenses, tripwires, spotters, rifles never more than an arm's reach away. The men huddled by dim lanterns, their faces worn, their voices rough. Laughter was gone, stories were gone, only survival remained. She sat apart, rifle across her lap, staring into the thin flame of a lantern. Her father's words drifted back, softer than the wind. "The silence after the shot is what matters." But what about the silence before? Her chest ached with the weight of it. Across the fire, Sergeant Hale watched her. His gaze was steady, unreadable, as though he'd been waiting for her to meet it. When she finally did, he nodded once. Not approval, not dismissal, something quieter. Acknowledgement. She turned back to the flame, the silence around her thicker than smoke. And somewhere beyond the camp, hidden in the dark, the mountain waited. Not if. When. The night didn't pass. It bled. Hours stretched into each other, measured by the snap of wood in the fire, the shuffle of boots on gravel, the low whispers of men too tired to sleep, but too afraid to stop listening. The mountain gave nothing, no wind, no call of an animal, just waiting. At dawn, the convoy moved again. The mist clung lower, denser, thick enough to blur the world into shadow. Engines groaned. Tires spat dust. Weapons stayed raised higher than before. Every man carried the firefight of the gorge in his eyes. She felt it too, the memory of tracers cutting the dark, of blood slick on Miller's hands. She carried the silence of that moment, heavy and sharp, a silence she hadn't broken soon enough. And yet when the ridge erupted yesterday, it was her voice that had carved a path through chaos, her orders, her warnings. The contradiction gnawed at her. Was silence her curse or her shield? The convoy wound deeper into the valley, cliffs rising taller, the sun reduced to a faint, pale disk above. Radios hissed softly but stayed clear, for now. But nothing felt clean in this place. Her scope swept the ridges, rock, dust, shadow, always shadow. She held her breath each time the mist thinned, each time a shape threatened to form. And then sound. Not the crack of gunfire, not yet, something quieter. Metal striking stone. She froze, head snapping toward it. The cliff to the right, halfway up, a glint, a shift. And then silence again. Her chest tightened. IED. The word clawed at her mind before her lips moved, but her throat locked. The convoy rolled forward. The lead truck groaned against broken rock. Her hand trembled against the radio. If she was wrong, if it was nothing, they'd lose time, lose trust, maybe lose patience with her altogether. But if she was right, her lungs burned with the weight of choice. The silence stretched too long. And then impact. The world split open. A thunderclap tore through the valley as the lead vehicle vanished in fire. Shards of metal screamed through the air, flames curling high into the mist. The shockwave punched through her chest, rattling teeth, rattling bones. Men screamed. Radios erupted with chaos. The convoy halted in disarray. Smoke bled upward, thick and black, blotting the pale sky. Her breath hitched. She knew this was her failure. The silence had betrayed her again. The second blast came before the first was finished burning. Left side, roadside berm, another eruption of fire and steel. The convoy scattered what little space the gorge allowed. Men dove from vehicles, weapons snapping upward, eyes wide with panic. The air became a storm of dirt and smoke, blinding, suffocating. And in that storm, the enemy opened fire. From above. From both sides. The mountain erupted with muzzle flashes. Bullets tore downward like rain, clanging against steel, punching into dirt. She hit the ground hard, rolling against a rock, rifle tight to her chest. Her ears rang, her vision blurred. Shouts split the chaos, orders, cries, pleas. Get down. Return fire. Medic, medic. Her scope rose, cutting through smoke. Shadows moved along the ridges, darting between cover, rifles blazing. She fired, her shots cracking sharp in the storm. One target fell, then another, but for each she dropped, more rose. This wasn't an ambush. It was an execution ground. The commander's voice ripped through radios, hoarse with fury. Form perimeter, hold the line, hold. The rest drowned in static. Her chest heaved. Every instinct screamed to act, to shout, to warn of the next nest she saw forming above the smoke. But her throat locked again. She had spoken yesterday, and it had saved lives. But today, silence had let 2 bombs tear men apart. Her hands shook. She sighted the nest forming at 2 o'clock, 2 men hauling a belt fed into position. She squeezed the trigger. The first shot clipped stone. The second struck one man in the chest. He fell, weapon tumbling from his grasp. The second man scrambled backward, vanishing into smoke. She didn't shout the warning, not this time. But Sergeant Hale did. 2 o'clock ridge, suppress. Gunfire turned, tearing into stone where she had aimed. A chorus of rifles answered, drowning the nest before it could open fire. The silence she had kept was filled by another voice, another presence. Her pulse raced. Was she still needed, or was she just a shadow? She dropped another target, then another. Her shots carved holes through the storm, her silence sharpening into deadly precision. The firefight raged for what felt like hours but could only have been minutes. The convoy bled men, vehicles burning in the valley floor. The mountain drank the chaos, swallowed the echoes, left only smoke and grief. And then retreat. The enemy melted back into the cliffs, gunfire fading into distance. Not beaten, not destroyed, just gone. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire had been. The ground was littered with shell casings and bodies. Some groaned, some didn't. The medic crawled from one to another, hands trembling, voice cracking with prayers. She lowered her rifle, chest collapsing with each breath. Her eyes found the blackened husk of the lead vehicle, flames reduced to smolder. She couldn't look at it long. Her silence had failed them. Again. The commander staggered toward her, helmet dented, face streaked with soot. His eyes locked on hers, hard, unreadable. "You saw it, didn't you?" Her mouth opened, closed, the weight of words pressed against her throat. She forced them out, raw and jagged. "Yes." His stare didn't waver. "Next time," he said, voice low, "don't give the mountain your silence. Give it to us." He walked on, leaving her with the weight of his words. She sank against the rock, rifle limp in her lap. Her hands shook harder than the blast had rattled her. She wanted to scream, to tear the silence from her chest and throw it into the fire. But nothing came. Only breath, only tears she wouldn't let fall. The sun clawed its way higher, dim through the smoke. The valley stank of blood and cordite. Around her, men gathered the wounded, covered the dead. Miller knelt again, his lips moving in prayer, eyes red but steady. His daughter's photo was still tucked in his vest, stained but unburned. She watched him, the way he spoke into silence as though it answered him back. And she wondered, if her silence wasn't strength and it wasn't weakness, then what was it? The convoy would move again, because it had to, because the mission didn't stop for grief. But tonight, when the fires burned low, when the men whispered their regrets into the dark, she would sit apart, and the silence would sit with her. And it would ask the question she feared most. How many more? The smoke lingered long after the gunfire had faded. It clung to the valley like a second skin, seeping into clothes, into lungs, into the memories of everyone left standing. The convoy had moved, but not far. The road ahead was jagged, twisted, broken by blast craters. Vehicles limped forward, some dragging, some carrying wounds in their armor as though they bled too. She sat in the back of a Humvee, rifle balanced across her knees. Her ears still rang from the blasts, her skin itched with dust. But it wasn't the smoke or the heat that kept her chest tight. It was the silence inside her. She replayed it again, the sound of metal on stone, the faint glint before the blast, the chance to speak, the choice not to, the explosion that followed. If she had called it out. Her throat burned at the thought. Outside, the commander walked the line as they halted again, barking clipped orders. Voices followed, tired, rough, brittle with grief. They buried 5 men in the valley floor. Their helmets rested on rifles, their names etched into silence. The mission wasn't over, but something had already ended. She could feel it in the way the men moved, slower, heavier, eyes empty. That night the campfire was smaller. No one dared let its light stretch too far. She sat at the edge, the rifle beside her, listening to the whispers. Not stories anymore, just fragments. "I saw him go up with the truck, just gone." Feels like we're walking into their hands every mile. They knew we'd take that gorge. Mistrust flickered like sparks in the dark, not at her, not yet, but at the mission, at the unseen hands that sent them here. She turned her face to the mist, eyes searching the ridges, always searching. She hated the way the mountains watched them, the way silence never ended here, it only deepened. Sergeant Hale came to her side. He didn't sit. He stood, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the dark. You saw it, didn't you? He asked quietly. Her breath caught. The commander's words hours ago echoed again. She didn't answer. Hale didn't press. He let the silence stretch until it ached. Then he spoke again, softer. You carry too much of it. Silence, I mean, like it's yours to protect. Her jaw tightened. And what did it protect today? He didn't flinch. We lost men, but we didn't lose all. You broke it in the gorge. You could have broken it again. Her voice cracked. And if I was wrong, if I shouted at shadows, then we'd have cursed you, and lived to curse you again. His tone was flat but not cruel, just true. She looked down, hands curling around the rifle's grip. She wanted to argue, but her voice was gone. The silence inside her was heavier than ever. Hale moved away, leaving her with it. Hours later, when the fire burned to ash, she finally slept. But the mountain gave no mercy. Dreams came sharp, jagged. She was back in the gorge. Only this time the nest was never spotted. The tracers tore the convoy apart. Miller's prayer ended mid-word. The commander's voice was swallowed in gunfire. She screamed to warn them, her voice breaking into the chaos, but nothing came. Her throat locked, her silence louder than the war itself. She woke with a start, sweat cold on her skin, rifle still clutched against her chest. The mist had thickened again, curling low, hiding shapes in the dark. For a moment she thought she saw one, a figure at the edge of camp standing too still, too quiet, watching. She blinked and it was gone. But the fear stayed. The next day the convoy crawled onward. Every mile was slower, every mile more dangerous. Roads crumbled into switchbacks, sharp turns hugging cliffs that fell into nothingness. Her eyes never left the ridges. Every shadow threatened to move. Every sound carried weight. By midday, radios crackled, enemy chatter caught faintly, but too broken to read. The men stiffened. Fingers tightened on triggers. The commander ordered a halt. Scouts moved forward, cautious, scanning with every step. Minutes dragged. Then nothing, no contact, no fire. They moved again, tension twisting tighter. The ambush came at dusk. Not bombs this time, not heavy guns, snipers. The first shot cracked so clean it sounded like silence breaking. The soldier ahead of her dropped without a sound, dust puffing around him. Chaos erupted instantly. Men dove for cover, rifles sweeping cliffs they couldn't see. The second shot tore through the windshield of a Humvee, glass exploding inward. A driver slumped against the wheel, lifeless. She pressed against the dirt, scope raised, scanning. Her breath came shallow. The cliffs were too wide, the mist too thick. Where? Her ears strained. She'd been taught to listen, to find the silence between echoes. And then there. The faintest shift of rock, the flash of metal. Her fingers squeezed. The shot cracked sharp, echoing. A body tumbled from the ridge, rifle clattering against stone. Sniper down, Hale shouted, voice cutting through. But more came. Shots splitting the dusk, carving the convoy apart. One by one the men shouted back with fire, rifles cracking into mist. She dropped another, then another, each shot steadier than her hands felt. Her silence sharpened her focus, narrowed the chaos into single targets. But the men, they weren't steady. Fear cracked their voices. Anger bled into their fire. The convoy wasn't a unit anymore. It was fragments, each man fighting his own ghost on the cliffs. The commander's voice cut in, fierce, demanding order. But the noise swallowed him too. And in that storm of voices, she realized something. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was clarity. Where noise scattered, silence narrowed. Where voices tangled, silence steadied. Her hands stilled, her breath leveled, she sighted again, fired. Another shadow fell. She didn't need to shout. Not this time. The men would hear when the gunfire above dimmed. And slowly, painfully it did. By the time darkness swallowed the valley, the cliffs had gone quiet. The snipers had vanished or bled into the stone. The convoy was bleeding too. More wounded, more dead. The men moved like ghosts now, carrying their grief in silence. As the camp formed that night, no one spoke. Not around the fire, not in whispers, not even Miller, who kept his photo pressed in his vest but no prayer on his lips. She sat alone, cleaning her rifle by lantern glow. Her silence no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a blade. And she knew the mountain would test its edge again. Not if. When. The mist thickened with the dawn. It pressed close to the convoy, swallowing the outlines of vehicles, softening boots against gravel. Men moved like shadows in half-light, faces gray, eyes dull. They were alive, but barely. No one spoke, not anymore. Even Miller, who had once prayed into silence as if it answered him, kept his lips sealed. His daughter's photo stayed tucked in his vest, folded and creased, but unseen. The mountain had taken too much. She walked among them, rifle slung, boots crunching faint on broken stone. The silence clung heavier than her pack. Every glance that brushed past her felt sharper, heavier, as if her choices sat in their eyes too. The commander's face was drawn tight, jaw hard. He still gave orders, clipped and sharp, but his voice carried less than before. Men obeyed because there was nothing else left, not because they believed. She believed less with every mile too. But the mission still pulled them forward, one weary step at a time. By mid-morning, the path narrowed into another stretch of switchbacks, cliffs looming above, drops yawning below. Vehicles crept one by one, tires scraping loose gravel. The air was thick with tension, every eye on the ridges. They expected another ambush. It didn't come. The silence stretched too long, too clean. And that was worse. By the time they made camp that night, unease had hardened into something heavier. Not fear, not grief. Doubt. She felt it in the way men glanced at each other before moving, in the way their eyes slid away from hers, unwilling to meet them for more than a second. It wasn't that they blamed her, not outright, not with words. But she carried silence, and silence had cost them. And so they let it sit between them, unspoken but heavy as stone. Around the fire, scraps of rations passed hand to hand. The flames licked at the dark, but no voices rose with it. Until one did. Private Keller, younger than most, his face still carrying something of boyhood. His voice cracked against the quiet, sharp with fatigue and anger. "What are we even doing out here?" The words landed like sparks in dry grass. No one answered at first, then another voice harsher. Marching into their traps, one after another. The commander's head lifted, eyes narrowing, but before he could speak, Keller pressed on. "We lost 10 men in 2 days. For what? For a road they knew we'd take, for ground they already own." Hale's voice cut sharp, "Quiet down." But Keller's words had already found air. Men shifted, some nodding faint, others staring hard into the fire. The silence had cracked, not with laughter or prayer, but with doubt that had been festering too long. She watched, chest tight. Her silence pressed against her ribs, begging to stay, begging not to break. But then Keller's eyes flicked to her. "And what about her?" His finger jabbed toward her. "She saw it, didn't she? The bombs, the glint on the ridge. She stays quiet and we bury friends." The fire popped. No one moved. Her throat locked. Hale rose, stepping between them, voice iron. "Enough. She saved more of your skins than you know. You want to pin your fear somewhere, pin it on the mountain, not on her." But Keller's words lingered. Men avoided her eyes again, some shifting uncomfortably, some staring at the dirt. The commander stood then, his shadow tall against the fire. His voice was low, hard, steady. "You think silence killed our men. You think she's the reason. Then listen close. The mountain doesn't care about your noise or hers. It only cares that you doubt. Doubt kills faster than bullets. And if you let it grow, you'll bury more friends before the week is done." The fire snapped, sending sparks upward. Keller sat down hard, lips pressed tight. The camp returned to silence. But it wasn't the same silence. It was fractured now, edged. She sat with her rifle across her lap, her hands steady though her chest burned. She didn't look at Keller. She didn't look at the men who wouldn't meet her eyes. Instead, she looked at the mountain. And for the first time, she hated her silence. Not because it was weakness, not because it had failed her, but because it had become a mirror for everyone else's fear. That night, sleep didn't come. She sat watch instead, eyes scanning ridges swallowed by mist. Her silence was no longer shield or curse. It was knife edge, cutting her from the men she was supposed to protect. But when dawn broke, she knew something else too. They would not survive the next ambush, not if they moved like this, not if they doubted like this. And the mountain was not done with them. The road ahead narrowed further, twisting into a canyon where cliffs leaned so close, it felt like the sky itself had been stolen. A perfect place to die. Her breath hitched as the vehicles crawled forward. She scanned the ridges, eyes straining. Nothing moved, no flash of metal, no sound. And that silence, that perfect silence, terrified her more than fire. Because silence like that only meant one thing. They were already waiting. Her finger hovered near the radio, her throat locked in war with itself. Speak or stay silent. The convoy moved deeper, swallowed whole by the canyon. And her heart knew. This was where the mountain would take everything. The canyon tightened around them. Stone walls rose on both sides, sheer and unforgiving, cutting off the sky. Engines echoed off the rock, magnified until it sounded like 100 machines instead of a handful. The air was cold, damp, heavy with the smell of dust. And silence. Not a bird, not a breath of wind. Her palms sweated against her rifle. She scanned the ridges, eyes darting, heartbeat steady but sharp. They were here, she knew it. Every nerve in her body screamed the truth. But her throat locked again, the familiar weight pressing down. The silence that had shielded her for so long now strangled her. The commander rode up ahead, chin lifted, scanning the cliffs with the same suspicion but pressing forward anyway. His voice broke over the radio. Keep moving, eyes up, guns ready. And still she said nothing. The first explosion tore the canyon open. The lead vehicle lifted, wheels spinning, then slammed sideways, blocking the road. Shouts ripped through the air. Stone rained down from the cliffside. Dust turned daylight gray. Then came the fire. Muzzle flashes licked the ridges. Bullets cracked, pinging against steel and stone. Men dove for cover. The canyon erupted in chaos, a storm of fire and screams. She pressed against rock, lungs burning, rifle snapping to her shoulder. Her scope found a figure high above, an enemy fighter leaning over the ridge. One breath, one squeeze. The man fell. Another appeared, another shot. The silence inside her burned hotter with every pull of the trigger. She could have warned them, could have broken it before the road swallowed them whole, but she hadn't, and now her silence was blood. Her scope swept the ridges. She counted breaths, counted heartbeats, fired, reloaded, fired again. Men shouted below, scrambling for cover, dragging the wounded behind burning vehicles. Smoke curled upward, black against the stone. Then her radio hissed. It was hail. They're pushing from both sides. We can't hold. His voice cracked, fear threaded through it. She pressed the radio to her chest, eyes burning. This was it. If she stayed silent now, they would all die. If she spoke, if she broke herself open, she would lose the only thing that had ever steadied her. But some silences weren't shields. Some silences were prisons. She pressed the radio button. Her voice rasped out, raw, jagged, breaking years of stillness. Ridge northwest high ground 20 meters past the curve. Heavy fire team. They'll push down, watch your left. The words cracked, her throat burned. But the canyon shifted. Heads turned, guns followed, fire rose against the high ridge. For the first time her silence broke and saved. The commander's voice surged through the smoke. You heard her shift fire. Rounds ripped upward. The enemy faltered, pinned under concentrated fire. The men pressed forward, dragging wounded, clearing space around the burning vehicles. She fired again, steady now, each shot deliberate, each wordless beat driving her forward. Minutes stretched like hours. The canyon shook with fire and stone. And then slowly it thinned. The fire slackened. Figures fell from ridges, silhouettes tumbling into dust. The echoes died. And silence returned. But not the same silence. This one was heavier, weighted with smoke, with blood, with lives saved and lost in the same breath. She lowered her rifle, chest heaving. Around her, men moved in stunned quiet, pulling bodies, tending wounds. Their faces were streaked with soot, blood, exhaustion. Keller stumbled past, his hands shaking, his eyes wide. He met her gaze for a fraction of a second, and for the first time he didn't look away. There was no gratitude in his eyes, no apology either. Just understanding. She sank against the stone, letting the rifle rest across her lap. Her throat ached where the words had torn free. The commander approached, face smeared with dust, eyes searching hers. He crouched, leaning close so only she could hear. You broke it when it mattered. His voice was soft, steady. And for a heartbeat, she thought he meant the silence. But maybe he meant something else. The convoy limped forward by nightfall, dragging what remained of itself through the canyon's throat. Engines groaned, men staggered, but they moved. Every sound, the crunch of boots, the grind of tires, felt louder now. The silence she had carried for so long had cracked, and the noise of survival filled the space it left behind. When the last ridge fell behind them, when the canyon opened into pale light, the men stopped. They stood in a loose circle, dust and blood binding them. No cheers, no words. Just silence again. But this silence was different too. It wasn't born of fear or suspicion. It was born of weight shared, of wounds carried together. She stood among them, silent still. Her voice had been broken open once, maybe only once, but it was enough. Because silence didn't mean absence. Sometimes silence meant shield. Sometimes silence meant strength. And sometimes silence spoke louder than anything else could. The convoy rolled on into the pale horizon, battered but alive. And she walked with them, her silence no longer misunderstood. It had become the unshaken shield of everyone around her. The mountain kept its echoes, the air kept its scars. But she carried silence, steady and unbroken. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.